A 12-year-old girl on a rusted bicycle, a milk crate zip-tied to the back, and inside it, someone else's garbage. For 6 straight weeks, she rode to every orchard within 20 miles, asking the same strange question, collecting things nobody else wanted. The whole town started talking. Her own mother couldn't explain it. And when someone finally asked her what she was building, she gave them nothing, just 4 words. I'm figuring it out. What she was actually building would take an entire season to finish. And by the time it was done, the very people who laughed at her were the ones asking her for help. This is the story of Ivy Marsh and the fruit crates nobody else wanted. It started with that bicycle, a rusted-out 10-speed, wobbling down Persimmon Lane on a gray Saturday morning in late October. 12-year-old Ivy Marsh rode it slow, careful, because the crate on the back wasn't empty. It never was anymore. The Marsh family didn't own a farm. Just 4 acres and a leaning shed out on the edge of Briar Hollow, Tennessee. So when people started noticing old wooden fruit crates piling up behind that shed, stamped with names of orchards 2 counties over, some so whether the lettering had almost worn away, nobody could explain it. Ivy wasn't a farm kid. She didn't have crates of her own to begin with. She was going out and getting other people's. By the 3rd week of October, she made trips to 5 different orchards along Route 411, always on that same bicycle, always asking the same quiet question. Do you have any old crates you're not using? Most people said yes. Well, like that just sat around rotting behind barns anyway, waiting for a bonfire that never quite happened. But the question traveled faster than she could pedal. Hollis Reed, who ran the feed store and considered himself the Hollow's unofficial newspaper, brought it up to Ivy's mother at the counter one afternoon. What's your girl doing with all them old boxes? Carol just shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine. When somebody finally cornered Ivy outside the church one Sunday, she looked at them the way she looked at everything lately, like she was working out long division in her head, and said only, I'm figuring something out. I'll show you when it's ready. That was all anybody got out of her for months. If quiet kids building something nobody expected is the kind of story that pulls you in, stay till the end. Drop where you're watching from the comments and subscribe for more. This one's got a long way to go yet. What nobody in Briar Hollow knew was that Ivy had been circling this idea since spring, ever since a Saturday when her grandfather took her along to the county extension office to sort out a soil test. While he filled out paperwork, Ivy wandered over to a bench where an old man sat sipping coffee from a thermos lid. His name was Walton Spear, 78 years old, a retired orchardist who'd spent 40 years growing peaches on a ridge above Cade's Fork before his knees gave out and the land got sold off in pieces. Walton liked to talk. Most people around the office had learned to walk past him quickly. Ivy didn't walk past. She sat down and asked what all those crates behind his old barn used to be for. He told her. Real wooden fruit crates, built from poplar slats, had been standing across the region for decades. Sturdy, reusable, built to take a beating. But plastic bins had replaced almost all of them. Easier to hose down, stackable 10 high without buckling, no splinters. The wooden ones just got shoved into back corners of barns and left to rot, or worse, burned. Thing is, Walton said, turning his thermos lid over in his hands, the wood's still good. It's just been sitting near old spray residue for years. You put food straight against that wood, that's a problem. Ivy frowned. What if you didn't put the food straight against it? Walton looked at her a long moment, the kind of look adults give right before they stop treating you like a kid. Then you might have something, he said. She went home with a single index card of notes and stayed up past 10 that night, sketching by lamplight in a spiral notebook swiped from her school backpack. By the time the leaves were fully down in November, Ivy had gathered 91 crates from 5 different properties. She spent the better part 2 weeks sorting them on a tarp behind the shed, testing every joint with her thumb, tapping each board and listening for the hollow give of rot. Crates with chemical staining she set aside completely. Those would never touch soil meant for growing food. Crates with cracked or split frames she broke down into raw lumber for something else later. What remained were 52 crates she trusted enough to build with. She sanded every one by hand, sealed the interior panels with a food-safe oil Walton had recommended, lined the bottoms with landscape fabric, so soil could drain without ever touching bare wood. The prep work alone swallowed most of a month. Her best friend, Dana Okafor, was the only person let anywhere near the project, and even she wasn't given a straight answer. "Are you building like a really elaborate flower box?" Dana asked one gray afternoon, eyeing the stacked crates with open suspicion. Ivy just smiled and kept sanding. Something like that. The first real attempt came apart on a Thursday in December. Ivy had stacked 18 crates into 2 narrow towers, 6 crates tall, intending to grow strawberries vertically up both columns. An idea copied loosely from a diagram in one of Walton's old growing journals, modified by guesswork because she didn't yet understand the math behind it. She'd loaded the top crates with wet potting soil, stepped back, and watched the whole structure list sideways within the hour. The joints at crate 4 gave first. Then the tower folded outward like a dropped stack of books, spilling dirt and torn root systems across the frozen grass. Ivy stood there in the cold for a long time, hands jammed in her jacket pockets, staring at the mess she'd made. Then she went inside, got her notebook, and turned to a clean page. 3 days later, Ivy showed Walton her revised sketches. He spotted the problems almost instantly. The joints weren't built to carry the weight of wet soil stacked across multiple levels, and she hadn't accounted for how much the wood would swell once it soaked up moisture. She needed cross-bracing between the towers, and she needed to cut the soil depth in each crate to shave weight off every level. "Light growing mix," Walton said, tapping a finger against her sketch. "Coconut coir perlite. Holds moisture without the mass." Ivy's notebook gained 6 new pages before she left his porch that afternoon. By February, the rebuilt structure was holding steady. 10 modular columns, each 5 crates tall, arranged in a shallow arc along the south-facing wall of the Marsh family shed. That placement wasn't luck. Walton had spent an entire afternoon teaching her about microclimates. The way a wall, a tree line, even a slope in a yard can trap warmth and block wind just enough to stretch a growing season 2 or 3 weeks longer on either end. Ivy had drilled planting holes into the sides of every crate, not just the tops, staggered at careful intervals, so strawberry runners and dwarf raspberry canes could push outward from every face of every column at once. Air moved freely between the plants, which cut down the fungal rot that usually wrecked dense ground-level berry patches. At the base of each column, she'd rigged shallow drainage trays, feeding into a gravity-fed line built from scavenged drip tape, looping the water back up to the top of each tower through a repurposed rain barrel, a closed-loop irrigation system, built entirely from parts other people had thrown away. Hollis Reed stood at the fence one afternoon in March and didn't say a word for almost a full minute. "Where'd she learn all that?" he finally asked Carol. "From paying attention," Carol said. The first real harvest came in April. Nothing enormous, nothing miraculous, but real, dense clusters of strawberries and early raspberries pulled from vertical columns that, laid out flat in traditional rows, would have needed nearly 4 times the ground space. Ivy did the math herself, comparing her yield per square foot against numbers she'd found in an extension office bulletin. Her system was producing at almost 3 times the density, not from one clever trick, but from a handful of small advantages stacking quietly on top of each other. Vertical space, better airflow, recycled water cutting her irrigation need by more than half, microclimate placement stretching her growing window into the edges of the seasons on both sides. She typed it all onto a single clean page and called Walton. "I want to show you something." He drove out that Saturday morning and walked the length of the arc slowly, bending to test joints, pressing 2 fingers into the soil to check moisture, counting plant spacing under his breath. He didn't say anything for almost 15 minutes. "How many crates altogether?" he asked. 52, Ivy said. He looked at her steadily. "You built all this out of things people were about to burn." Ivy looked at the columns. "The crates were already built," she said. "I just gave them a second job." Spring brought a new problem she hadn't planned for. Even seal would only held up so long. After 3 or 4 seasons of soaking and drying, the frames would eventually start to fail. The system needed a way to retire old crates without tearing apart the columns still producing around them. Her answer was a modular rotation. Any single column could be taken apart and rebuilt without disturbing its neighbors, and the retire didn't go to waste either. It broke down into compost that fed straight back into the soil beneath the very structure it came from. Orchard waste became growing frame. Growing frame became compost. Compost fed the next season. The whole loop closed on itself. Ivy spent the following weeks writing it all down with her school's agriculture teacher, Mr. Pruitt, turning a shed full of scattered notes into a real assembly guide. Soil ratios, irrigation diagrams, spacing charts, rotation schedules. She had no idea yet that anyone outside Briar Hollow would ever read it. When the county extension office held its spring field day that May, Ivy was asked to present. She hadn't asked for the invitation. Walton had made a phone call. Nearly 40 growers stood in the Marsh family's side yard that morning, Hollis Reed among them, standing near the front without saying much of anything. They watched Ivy walk to the columns. Now well into their second stretch of growth, new leaves already crowding every planting hole. She explained airflow, drainage, the math behind soil weight, the microclimate mapping Walton had taught her. She'd planted a low border of clover and wildflowers along the base of every column, just to draw bees to a structure that, unlike flat rows, kept blossoms at height across several levels at once. She answered questions for over an hour without a single note card. Hollis waited until most of the crowd had cleared out. He walked up, looked at the column for a long moment, then looked at her. "I owe you an apology," he said. Ivy shook her head. "You owe me a truckload of your old crates." He laughed. The first time, people said later, that anyone in Briar Hollow had ever heard Hollis Reed laugh at himself. By that summer, Dana helped Ivy install a second arc of columns at a farm on the other side of the county. By fall, 2 local schools had reached out about building smaller versions for their own garden programs. The extension office printed her assembly guide in its newsletter. A small orchard 2 states over asked about a video call. A community garden asked if she'd come teach their volunteers. The old fruit crates, the ones stacked behind sheds and barns, waiting for someone to finally burn them, weren't waste anymore. They were waiting, it turned out, to be useful again. And the quiet girl who'd loaded them onto the back of a rusted bicycle on a gray October morning, the one nobody thought had any real plan at all, had built something nobody in Briar Hollow had seen coming. A system where nothing got thrown away, where everything found a second purpose, and where the smallest forgotten things became the foundation of something real. She hadn't done it with speeches. She hadn't done it with noise. She'd done it the only way anything worth building ever gets built, by watching closely, by trying, by failing once and learning twice, by staying with it through every season that followed, because she understood, the way patient growers always eventually do, that nothing good ever comes from rushing a harvest.